thank you very much for being here. We're going to hear from a few thoughts from each of our new panellists for a few moments, and then we are going to open the debate to the audience. So I'd like to ask Louise first to introduce herself and maybe tell us, your very experienced PR professional, your thoughts on the agenda for tonight about gaining media attention.
Yes, I mean, first of all, it's important to tell you that actually I come from a business advisory background, and then I moved into PR about 15 years ago. So I think that what I can bring to this evening is actually some reality check for those of you who are still relatively small companies to be thinking about how all this fits in with your actual overall business plan. I think that's really quite important. But yes, I happen to have a company based in Nottingham, but we handle a lot of sort of national, international campaigns for clients. My job as a professional PR person is to manage the relationship between, you guys, and you will have to do this if you're doing your own PR, and indeed the media. So, and this is a very important, relationship to develop. So you will be acting as professionals. So by the end of the evening, I'd like to think that, well, you might not be able to afford me anyway. So what I want you to be able to go away and be your own PR. The important thing, I think, is just what I've learned and that I want to put across to you is that actually, my job is to make sure my client's message is very, very clear, that it is informative and accurate. Because journalists simply won't listen to me or to you if that's not the case. But also my job and your job will be to help journalists to do their job, and it's getting harder. Last Thursday, the BBC made enormous cuts, so there'll be fewer high-quality editors out there to provide you and I with quality content. So it's very important for you and I to actually help journalists to do a crackingly good job. And in this country, we have a fantastic media that, frankly, we can't afford to lose. Planning is very important, and that'll be one of my top tips. So I help clients to plan their media work. Obviously, Shazia is putting into practice all that she's learned already in her business, and I guess she's got a cracking good plan there. But also, as in the PR profession, we have to be researchers. PR is not glamorous. It's not. A lot of our work is hard graft research, it's facts, it's gathering that information. Please don't do any media work for yourselves unless you've done quality research around that. So I want you to be me by the end of the evening. I've probably done myself out of a job, but that's what I tend to do here at the British Library. So can I run through my top tips?
Please.
If that's enough, just an introduction from me. First and foremost, it'll seem really boring, but please plan. Please don't go into any media work until you've actually looked at why you're doing this. Hands up, those of you who've actually got a business plan. Now, how many... Okay, somebody tweet the fact that we've probably only got about 20% of the audience.
I think it was more than
go
that.
on, you didn't put your hands up high enough. Okay, within that, how many of you have actually got a marketing and PR plan? Well, that's good to see a few hands go up because that's actually pretty good. So planning, really, really important. And that means be very clear about who your target audience are. Be very clear about the demographic. I'm sure for Peachy Pink, there's a very clear demographic as to who are being targeted. Is it the over 50s? Is it the over 60s? Or is it the under 20s? How are they picking up news these days? Absolutely changed so much from when I started in the PR industry 20 years ago. I was actually printing press releases off, putting them in envelopes and sticking stamps on and sending them in the post. My office has changed. It's actually physically changed in its appearance. So how are they picking up this news? And map the two against each other, and you've got a cracking plan. Second thing is, and I think we'll come on to this a bit more, what is news? Will you please give your press release a reality check and just say, so what to it? Yeah? What are you trying to say? What is news? But we'll come back to that, I'm sure. And thirdly is be realistic about coverage. I have clients who expect to be on Jonathan's page most weeks. Well, to be in the Financial Times, you have to go through some pretty rigorous tests. Be realistic, maybe start small, start simply, but and gradually build through. And I think those are my three top tips from the PR side of the story.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you. Let's move on to Jonathan. Jonathan, as you've heard, enterprise editor, correspondent at the Financial Times, writes great stuff in this whole space. So very interesting to hear your views. Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you. Firstly, I feel a bit overdressed here with my tie. I've worked for the FT for 12 years now, and 6 of those I've been writing about entrepreneurs. Obviously, at the FT, we are the Entrepreneurs newspaper, and you are hopefully the future readers of us. But we have a particular slant, I suppose, on business, and we're writing about sort of growth businesses and how to build those companies. What I do, I write during the week, and I have a number of different kinds of stories I'm writing. What you may be getting into the FT for is a particular section of that. And it's important to think about how you get into a newspaper and what kinds of newspapers may be interested in whatever stories you have. A lot of people say to me, what is an FT story? And it's quite difficult to tell you what the FT story is. You have to tell me what the story is. It's so my first tip would be to read the papers you're pitching to. I know that sounds obvious, but it's amazing how many people phone me, and after a few minutes on the telephone, you realise they don't actually know what kind of pieces we're running in the FT, and people will say to me, well, I've got this company and we're growing really fast at the moment, and I know we're in the worst recession in 80 years, but there are a lot of businesses that are growing fast, and you need to think about the kinds of stories we are running in the FT. Readers, we do very different stories during the week to the weekend FT, where I have an entrepreneur section that we're doing. We're writing about the challenges of building a business, and sometimes that's hard to talk about, especially, as Matthew said, entrepreneurs are positive people, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a privilege for me, surrounded by cynical journalists, to be able to actually go out and talk to people who actually believe there's a better future. But you've got to think about talking about those challenges with us, because often that's where the news story comes out. But read through the paper. Read what a particular journalist tends to cover, because then you'll know how to pitch that story to them, and what they'll pick up on, what's interesting to them, and also know how your company can fit into the FT. Now it is difficult to get into the FT, but it's not impossible. And I personally want to get more of real businesses into the paper, but you sort of need to help me on that score in understanding how we can get you into the paper. Your P&L is not going to get you into the paper, because we don't get out of bed for less than a £10 million business. At least. So think about what other stories you have of building a business. Those are the things we are interested in. Second tip, I'd say, after reading about journalists and knowing what they write about, is think in entrepreneurial terms. Your story pitch is a bit like the elevator pitch that everyone talks about if you're fundraising. So make sure you've got the story precisely, and the key elements of it, and maybe try it out on some other people might see if they're actually interested in this. If they aren't, then chances are the journalist's not going to be interested either. And thirdly, I think this has been mentioned before about it being a dialogue. Now, I think actually the media has always been a dialogue. We are the media because we're in the middle of a conversation between people. Maybe that social networking emphasises that, but that's always been the case. And people who you often see in the media are those who are good at just building a relationship with a journalist. That means that they're just willing and able to be there for a conversation with a journalist. They don't get pushy, but they know how to have an opinion about a subject. And if there's something they see around them, they'll ping that journalist something. Not blitz them, not harass them. It's about again building this relationship with someone, so the journalist can trust you, and then maybe they'll what I find is often we've got a news item of the day, and I need a few real businesses to talk to about that issue. And there are people I've built up a relationship with, and I know I can go to them and they'll be available, and they can give me something of value and a comment on a particular issue. If I've got those relationships with people, I'm going to come to you. I'm not going to just come to you out of the blue. So think of it as a long-term process with people. Some of the best stories I've got from people are people I've known for a long time. We've just talked, and I've said a lot of places, well, that's not really a story. We can't really do that. But they've kept in touch, and then they've come to me with something, and yeah, it's something I can use.
Yeah, it's great. You're so right, Jonathan, about being honest about the challenges that you're facing building up a business. I mean, business isn't easy. Everybody knows that. And trying to paint to journalists that it's a somehow, easy, frictionless journey to great success is not really very helpful. And actually, I think we in the media don't want to rubbish. Certainly the media like Jonathan and I represent, I think we're probably pretty fundamentally pro-business. We don't want to rubbish businesses, but you sharing your challenges and some particular things that you found difficult or that you're trying to work your way around is actually interesting copy for us.
No, exactly. And actually, if we just do sort of puff pieces, I think particularly, I have to say, one of the great things about working at the FT is the readership of the FT, who are very intelligent people, and they see through that sort of bullshit, for want of a better word, about it. And actually, they'd much rather have an intelligent debate about it, because most of those know about going through this process. And more importantly, I think for the FT, we want to further this debate about entrepreneurship. Yeah. And part of that is getting away from this fact that everything's fine and it's just a wonderful journey and you move forward, and because no one learns anything from that, and it's not true. Yeah. Actually think about it. Actually, you're building your credibility in a sense by being honest.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm sure we'll get lots of questions for you and the others in a minute. Let me hand over now to Rob, very distinguished broadcaster, business journalist of great experience and standing, and probably brings a different perspective, more, as I say, around the broadcast field. So, Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Yeah, hopefully I will speak mainly from a broadcast journalist perspective tonight. I actually do have a PR company now. I left the BBC about a year ago, but I think for your purposes it's more useful if I give you the gut reaction of a broadcast journalist. I've got 3 tips I want to go through, but before I do, I just wanted, in case they get lost in what happens later on, to kind of underline a few things that have been said tonight that I wholeheartedly agree with. And I've also got a little tip as well. Don't be afraid to ring newsrooms, because journalists actually spend their entire working life ringing up people they don't know who probably don't want to hear from them. And so they quite understand what it's like to try and do that. So when you call a newsroom, you'll almost certainly, and this is true, isn't it, Jonathan, you'll get someone going, newsroom, sounding as hard as possible. But in fact, they're really soft and they're really gentle, and they will talk to you because they appreciate how hard it is. And very quickly as well, people have talked about being open and honest, and that's really important, because if you're not open and honest, they'll find out very quickly. If you invite journalists into your place, they'll find out where all the weak fault lines are, and also have a bit of passion as well. If you look at all the people on TV, they may be ugly, they may be attractive, but they're all passionate. That's what gets them on telly. And another aside, as Shazia has already proved, sex sells. You get the kind of stunt she uses for the broadcast media. They love things like that. They don't like to admit it, but they do. Anyway, I'm going to come to my actual proper
just
tips.
before, because you mentioned something that's come through on Twitter. Do journalists prefer to be emailed or called from Twitter? And you've mentioned about calling newsrooms. What's your view on that?
I think it's probably best to send an email first, and that gives you a reason to ring up then. You say, oh, did you get my email? And you've got an excuse. But journalists don't really mind. I've worked in local newspapers, and I felt then it's a little bit like dealing with the fire service. You want to know about all the fires that are happening. You might not necessarily go and put them all out, but, you do like to know it's happening. So, you've got a dialogue, and also you'll get feedback from them. The journalist will say, I don't like that story for this reason, and you know what's wrong with it. And you come back to it and sort of go, oh, yeah, and the next time you've got a story they'll be interested in. But my tip would be email first, then follow it up with a phone call. Yeah. Just very briefly, my background, I was a business correspondent with the BBC for about, 15 years, actually. Mainly worked on the Working Lunch programme, and yes, despite this face, they let me go on television. But that was the same programme that had Adrian Chiles on it, so you can imagine the standards weren't too high. Please don't tweet that, by the way, because you'll probably...
It's already out.
knowing Adrian, bloody Rob Pittam, I don't know. He'll be straight on to me. And I'm going to give you tips, as I say, from being a broadcast journalist, but I want to kind of embellish my 3 tips with a story that happened to me on Monday from the world of PR. I do the PR for a company that's growing really fast. It's a great story. They're taking on 50, 60 people. Every time you go into the office, there's a new person there. Absolutely brilliant. I walked in on Monday morning and I sat down, and the head of marketing turned to me and he said, we've just repainted our 200th van. Do you think it's a story? I went, no, it's not a story. And he said, oh, well, it was worth a try. And he said, anyway, I've got to get off. I've got to do an induction this morning. And I said, what's that about? And he said, well, we're having an induction day for everybody that started this month. And I said, how many of them are there? And he said, well, there's 80 of them. And we've had to take over the local hotel. The office isn't big enough for it. And I was going, that's the story. But by then, it was too late. And these 3 points that I'm going to make this will illustrate those points. The first thing is, and this is from a broadcast journalist point of view, don't tell us about something that's happened. It's too late. If it's happened and we haven't filmed it, it hasn't happened as far as we're concerned. We can't cover it. So that's my first tip. And obviously, it was too late. I got straight on to the local TV station. They couldn't get a TV crew around there in time for this story, but they would have covered it. It's always about people, not things. Journalism is about something happening to somebody, and that's really important. It's about people. It's not about your latest computer machine or anything like that. We used to go into companies, and they'd have an old guy who's about 60, whose job was to file down the last part of the job, and we would always film that because it was a person doing something. We wouldn't film the CNC machines, really boring big beige boxes with a bit of water going. So it's always about people, and bear that in mind. And my final tip for now is it's not an advert. That's a really hard thing to get into your head. And people just sort of say, oh, can you get this in the press and get them to say this? And we've talked quite a bit already about it being a dialogue. And on the other side of that dialogue is the audience. And that's what the journalist knows. And the journalist is thinking about them all of the time. And you might think they're asking strange questions, but the reason they're asking those questions is they know that question will occur to their audience. And so you have to bear that in mind. And it also means you've got to let a little bit of control go out of it as well, because the journalist will come, assess the story, decide what's interesting for their audience, and put that out to them. And you have to be prepared for that. One of the hardest parts, I'm sure Louise will tell you, is managing the expectations of clients, because they'll just go, well, they didn't say that, they didn't say that. And the truth of the matter is the journalist decided it isn't interesting, but they found something interesting in the story. Anyway, I've got a whole load of tips I'm sure will arise as we carry on, but I thought I'd leave that with you for now, and let's get into the questions.
Excellent. Nice one.